Just living in today's modern world puts so much stress and strain on our body and could be keeping us in survival mode. That in turn can then create so many health symptoms, so many hormonal issues, infertility being one of them. And it really boils down to what our body's perceiving as stress. That's why I'm so honored to have Dr. Kaveen Mistry on the podcast today. He is a board certified neuroradiologist who has been in the game for over 20 years, has read over 300,000 scans. And from his experience of just looking at people's scans all day, every day, and seeing the changes that can be present regardless of someone's age, meaning they could look so much older or so much younger than their actual chronologic age, that he started to wonder what more is impacting our health. He fairly recently authored the book Primal Health Design and is the creator of the Primal Reset program. And he takes this blend of experience that he has and really brings such a unique conversation to how we can get our body out of survival mode into safety mode and what we can really do to live a more primal life even in today's modern world. It's the tips he brings are very realistic. He's not expecting anyone to overhaul their whole life and go live in a hut in Africa, as he puts it, but really gives some really actionable tips that you can implement in your life and change the signaling that your body is getting. I love this episode. He's really just such a pleasure to speak with, and I know you're going to enjoy this. Dr. Mystery, thank you so much for being with me today.
Pleasure being here, Miranda.
To start, I'd love to hear a little bit of your backstory. I'm just curious, by training, you're a neuroradiologist, and what pushed you into the sort of longevity ancestral space?
Miranda, when I started radiology, and I'm sure, when you did your residency and in my first day in radiology, and I've studied all these normal models in the books, right? Like this is what the body should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember first day in radiology, the first study was like a spine of a 40-year-old that looked like the person was like 60. And my first thought was, good God, like what happened here? And this does not look like anything that I studied. And my first question to my senior resident was, I said, what's going on? How come this 40-year-old looks like this? I mean, and it's interesting. We use this phrase in our report that's called no acute disease. I'm sure you've seen a lot of reports, no acute disease, right? But I dictated it as such because that's what I was trained to do. But I said, yes, there's no acute disease, but why is this 40-year-old looking like a 60-year-old? And so that question stayed with me, even though my senior resident said, like, don't worry about this. Just read the damn film and move on. So 20 years later, I I've looked through about 300,000, I would say, plus scans. And I've seen people age faster biologically and physically on my screen than their chronological age, than their birthdays. And what I've studied is what makes people age. But more interesting than that, I do see exceptions where I see 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds whose brains and bodies look like they're 40 and 50. And those are my rare exceptions where I want to study them. And I said, what is that guy doing right? And so over the past 20 years, it's boiled down to about 7 key paradigms that I've created that I believe really alter the course of how we age. It led to a book which was published about a year and a half ago. It's called Primal Health Design. And I feel that this information needs to be shared. And so here we are.
Incredible. Well, you have such a unique perspective from that angle of being able to see physically inside people's bodies to see how they are aging and those effects of it. And then being able to share that in a way that, yeah, we can really, I think it's so empowering to know that we can change our aging process no matter how old we actually are chronologically. So Well, today we're kind of focusing a little bit on the brain hormone connection. So to take it there, maybe we can start with explaining kind of what is the HPO axis? What does that even mean to someone who's maybe never heard that before?
Right. And without getting too technical or academic for people, okay?
Hmm. Hmm.
One thing I would say, in my work studying neuroscience and studying longevity, I believe females, if you look at just the biology, are more evolved in a sense because you guys are given the privilege of carrying a baby, right? And which is if you look at evolutionary perspective, you have to be more evolved to have that mechanism built in place, right? Males don't have that. Okay, we don't have a cycle. We don't have all these other things that is required to carry a baby. But it's a blessing and a curse at the same time for people, okay, for women. Blessing in the obvious sense we just talked about, but a curse in a sense that you have to deal with the all the hormone fluctuations that goes with the menstrual cycle. And then at the same time, females are more in tune with emotional triggers, mental stresses, and whatnot. And we'll talk about that. And so, what that leads to is a system, a biology that the women have that is very tuned to the environment. And with that said, what that means is that your whole biology is very much in sync with your environment and with the emotional and the mental conditions that are surrounding you. And so that leads us to the fact that what is this HPA axis? Okay. And that is hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, right? So our hypothalamus secretes certain what we call as releasing hormones. Okay. Particularly in one of them is called a corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. Okay. That's your hypothalamus. So your CRH secretion has a lot to do with how your brain and your body is sensing all these emotional and mental triggers around you. Okay. So that's one thing to get right. Okay. Now that CRH, once it's released, it impacts your pituitary gland. Okay, your pituitary gland secretes a hormone called ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, we won't repeat that. We'll just call it ACTH,
Hmm.
right? So your pituitary secretes that, and it's an intermediary which is released into the system, and that goes to your adrenal glands. And in the cortex of the adrenal gland, which is kind of like the outer layer of the adrenal gland, that is where the hormone cortisol is produced. So the ACTH from the pituitary dictates how much cortisol is in your body. And the cortisol, I think most people have heard of that hormone. People are familiar with that in terms of the stress response and everything like that. But what this axis means, this HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, means that your body's constantly reading your emotional environment, your mental environment, and then dictating the cortisol release. Okay. If that's true, and particularly with women being more sensitive to these factors, then we have to figure out that how do we improve women's health by optimizing this axis? Because for a lot of people that are struggling with health, women's health, particularly struggling with fertility issues, we're seeing that there is a dysfunctional HPA axis.
Yeah. And I love that you call us evolved. Shut. I think every woman will appreciate you saying that. But it is such a good point to bring up that women are more sensitive to our environment, to the stressors, and it isn't just that, oh, it's our job to be in charge of the household or our children's needs, but it's also our wiring that we are just more aware maybe of the environment and more sensitive to the environment. So that's a good point to remind
And
them.
Miranda, I would add one more thing to that. With my background, growing up in Africa and with sort of like tribal cultures, one of the things you see is that there is this constant, whether you want to buy into it or not, we are primal beings,
Mm.
right? Biologically, our body and brain is constantly evaluating the environment and saying, are we in safety mode or are we in survival mode? Okay. And if your brain or your body senses that it is in survival mode, okay, then it is going to conserve all the resources. And fertility is something that takes up a lot of resources. It's a very energy depleting process, right? To go through this process of implanting the egg and going through ovulation, implanting the egg, then going through that whole process of building a baby, right? Making a baby. So you will not take on this task unless you are in safety mode. If you're in survival mode, you're going to shut down your fertility. So if you think about it, everything in terms of women's health boils down to this central fundamental principle is, are you are you giving your body a signal of safety or survival?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I guess if we kind of use that as a driver for this conversation, I think it'll make a lot of sense to women.
Yeah, definitely. And that's exactly the same description I usually give women, especially when it comes to fertility, that our bodies are very smart. This is a very smart system that is, primally wired, like you said. With that, how sensitive is it? So, especially nowadays, our stressors are, it's not the tiger that we're running away from anymore. It's, getting to an appointment on time. It's, getting things done for a work deadline. So, is there an answer as far as how sensitive that system is, or is it just dependent on each woman?
So as we mentioned that women overall are more sensitive to these cues than men,
Mhm.
that's granted, right? And I would say that is an advantage for women that you are more sensitive, which makes you better at many things in terms of connection, in terms of even sometimes leadership, because you're able to read people better than men are. At the same time, you're also stressed out about things that maybe does not bother a man,
Mhm.
and my wife will come off like talk, we'll speak with somebody and I'll be like, to me, it wouldn't even cross my mind. Like, I was like, oh, nice guy. And my wife would go, no, he just like, he had this weird, I got a bad feeling from him, and I
Mm.
was like, really? But she's just more tuned to that. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so with that said, to answer your question, what are in the modern age, what are those triggers for women?
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
And again, we can talk about many things, but if we break it down into some fundamental things, okay. And the way I walk people through, I have a program, it's called a Primal Reset program. It's a 21-day course, like a master class I take people through. And what I help people do is I work towards developing a certain area. So from a physical health aspect, okay, and this is probably uh, concepts you teach your patients. As you know, that alignment of our primal alignment with the circadian rhythm is very, very important, right? Even though you may think that you can stay up till 2 a.m. without a problem but your body is keeping time. Okay. And so we know that when people are out of alignment with the circadian rhythm, it's a stressor, whether you perceive it as a stress or not, you're stressing out your body. Okay. Same thing with uh, physical, and talk about still physical health is how we move and how we are carrying ourselves during the day in terms of our alignment with how we are doing our work. Are we sitting too much all day? So just from our physical body. And the last piece from the physical aspect is the metabolic component, is that, how, in terms of the food and how it is impacting our metabolic health, particularly like glucose levels and whatnot. Is our metabolic health stressing us out or kind of taking us towards that more of a safety and relaxation mode? So similarly, I help people kind of build that alignment in the mental space, emotional space, and more of that existential space as well.
Beautiful. I think we could talk for days about how these different lifestyle aspects impact our hormones directly, but I think it's amazing how you simplify it down to, is it stressing us out? Is it making us feel safe? I think that is such a great, very simple way for women, people in general, but women especially, to determine, what their body is needing and what they're kind of putting in their system. From there, can you speak maybe directly, since we're talking about the circadian rhythm and sleep, can you speak a little bit more to that, of just how our circadian rhythm impacts that, maybe our hormonal production? And you were speaking specifically about fertility as well.
Sure. So we know that the female cycle, as well as when you talk about fertility and the different hormones required for fertility, right? Particularly, so we mentioned the HPA axis. We talked about the hypothalamus, right? So the hypothalamus is also releasing hormones that impact the release of FSH and LH, the follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, which directly impacts fertility. Okay. So just as the hypothalamus is very susceptible to stressors and impacts that release of cortisol, it is also impacting the releasing hormones that impact this FSH and LH levels, which play a big role in fertility. Okay. So that whole axis is also impacting that fertility aspect. Now, as far as sleep, we know that when you get less than 6 hours of sleep, you are stressing your system out on multiple levels. One is that your body has not had a chance to reset or detox. We know that, let's say you sleep for 6 hours, the first 3 hours of your sleep are essentially a detox or where a cleaning crew comes up for your body, as well as for your brain. We know there's a lymphatic system for our body, as well as for our brain, we have a glymphatic system, which clears out a lot of the proteins from our brain, particularly like beta amyloid, which we know now it's related to Alzheimer's and whatnot. And so when that aspect is not there, or your quality of sleep is not there, now people say, "Oh, okay, I slept for 6 hours," but you may have slept for 8 hours, but if your quality of sleep is not there, then the cleaning crew doesn't come in also. Okay, so if you don't get into deep sleep, that you will not have that detox effect. And if you don't have that detox, then you maintain all those toxins or all those products in your system, causes inflammation. Now, your system still senses it as a threat. So it puts it into survival mode. And again, it brings us back down to that central premise. Is your body sensing survival mode, or is it safety mode, right? And if your body senses that it needs to be in survival mode, again, the level of releasing hormones from your hypothalamus will be impacted, pituitary hormones will be impacted, fertility goes down, and so on and so forth. Okay. So sleep is a key player here.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you mentioned even the environment in our brain, which I think a lot of people, again, don't really think about, that our brain needs to detox also. So that goes into a lot of other areas, but also into, like you said, that basic premise of just what is our body perceiving as stress. So that's a huge one. And with that too, our cellular health and mitochondrial health in all of our body can impact this as well. Is that something that you've seen too in, even our brain's ability to produce energy and have the safety versus survival signals?
So we know that our energy production is best when we are in safety mode.
Hmm.
And we know that when we're in survival mode, if we have any sort of a stressor, okay, so remember, the stressors could be on many different levels. We talked about sleeping less than 6 hours. Physical stressors could be not moving enough or sitting all day. That's also a stressor, even though it looks like I'm not stressing myself out. I'm just like
Hmm.
sitting around all day. Well,
Hmm.
but your body needs the movement because that's its primal design. When you don't give it its primal alignment and primal design, it's stressing the body out, even though you feel like you're sitting around all day. Okay. Same thing from a metabolic aspect, right? So, so all of these things directly impact our energy production as well. So when we stress our body out, whether from any of these parameters that we talked about, our cortisol level goes up. Again, we talked about the HPA axis leading to that cortisol release from the adrenal gland. When cortisol levels are up, it impacts our mitochondrial function.
Hmm.
And our mitochondria are not optimized when cortisol is up. Okay. And so that again, we switch into survival mode rather than safety mode. And that impacts energy production. And so people feel that they're dragging. People feel that again, they're just kind of in third gear instead of that fifth gear that they could be in.
Hmm.
And a lot of times people don't know what is stressing them out. And it may not be a direct mental stress that most people think about. When I say stress, people always think, oh, I'm not stressed.
Hmm.
Yes, but are you sleeping, you know, 6+ hours? Is your metabolic health optimized? Do you have the proper movement? If you don't, you are stressing yourself out.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great distinction to make because I hear that from everyone also. Like stress, we think of just as that mental emotional stress. So, yeah, what is our body perceiving as stress? And with that too, I mean, in our modern world, there are so many things then taking us away from our primal design, as you put it, and what our body is really wanting. So maybe we can go a little bit more into that of like, what are those things? What are those pieces that are maybe causing more strain on our system? And what can we do to then bring it back to that balance that our body's looking for?
Miranda, so people ask me, what do I do now? Okay, here
Mhm.
we are in the modern world.
Mhm.
Obviously, I can't escape and live in a hut in Africa and give all this up. You have to survive here. You have kids and you have a family. You have a job, and so again, the solution is not to escape, but the solution is that how can we realign with our primal self,
Mhm.
right? That's the solution. And so, how do we do that? And what I tell people is that if you look at your day, what part of the day do you have most control over? And for most people, it's usually the beginning of the day and the end of the day. I
Mhm.
call it sort of the bookends of your day, right? Which sort of hold the whole mechanism up. Another way of looking at this is in my book, I talk about the suspension bridge. If you look at uh, the Golden Gate Bridge. You have the first pillar and the second pillar, and that's all. The whole bridge is supported by the beginning and the end pillars. And I look at your morning routine and your evening routine as those pillars.
Mm.
And if those two things are dialed in properly, which is really the only thing you have control over, because in the middle of the day, all hell can break loose, as you
Mhm.
know, right? Like when you're at work and when you're doing, it's not like you can really implement anything consequential or, in terms of your lifestyle during the day because you're just called to do so many things and you have to constantly check your phone and everything like that. So before all that madness begins, you got to find out that what is the time period I have in the morning that is mine, that I have control over, and what is the time period in the evening that you can really impact. And with those two areas identified, I tell people now let's build practices that now you can use to align with your primal self. And just to touch upon few things, one of the things is that we talked about is like aligning with your circadian rhythm.
Mhm.
So depending on the time of the day that you wake up, and if it's light outside, okay, and that get some daylight, okay, even if it's not direct sunlight, get some daylight within that first half an hour that you wake up. So it tells when a certain frequency or certain lux level of light hits the back of your retina, there's a direct connection. And most people don't know that your back of your retina is still part of your brain. Okay. That is your nervous system. So when that light hits the back of your retina, it's essentially light hitting your brain and signaling that it's daytime. Now your circadian rhythm starts aligning. So that morning light triggers when in the evening that melatonin will be released.
Mhm.
So the time clock starts when that light hits. So most people say who have trouble sleeping in the evening can benefit by getting morning light, which is sort of counterintuitive,
Mhm.
but that's how it works because your body has an internal clock. So first I tell people is one, align with the circadian rhythm. Morning light is important. The other thing that I have people work on is in terms of aligning their body and
Mm.
making sure that so one of the things I have people do is work on neck exercises so that don't spend your whole day in this forward head posture. When I say forward head posture, if right now people are listening to this, if you look at the position of your ears relative to your shoulders, I would say 99% of the people listening to this, your ears are going to be uh, anterior to your shoulders, right? That's called a forward head posture. The degree of which depends on how much you look down at your phone and what you're doing. But what that does is for every inch that your ears are in front of your shoulder level, you put 10 pounds of stress in the back of your neck muscles. And you can see 2 inches will be 20 pounds and so on and so forth. That stresses your system out.
Mm.
Okay. And when that alignment is off and you spend your whole day with this forward head posture, it stresses out your system. Okay. And it introduces this stress. So, one of the things I do with people is align their body. We align the neck, we align the mid back, we align the hips, and get them in a in a type of alignment that de-stresses your body and gives you a sense of ease throughout the day. Okay. So that's in terms of aligning with the earth, aligning with the body. And the third part, that you begin your day in a way that metabolically you are aligned with your natural rhythm. And what for most people, your body, most people look at food and say, okay, well, my body must be really happy when I eat. It's
Mm.
actually the reverse because digestion is very energy intensive. I'm sure you know, Miranda, from your work, right? When you eat, the body has to respond to it on so many levels in terms of digestive enzymes, in terms of hormones, in terms of many different things. So it almost has to break out of safety mode into survival mode to
Mhm.
digest that meal. And what I tell people is that your morning time, you don't want to just shock your body with a heavy meal. For most people, and I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting, what it allows people to do, if you can go without breakfast or go with a minimal meal that keeps you in that fasting state, your body can actually heal itself, in that morning hours, and for most people, that's a better way to start. Okay. Again, there are many different layers to this. We can talk about mental space, emotional space, and existential space, but that's how I start people off with their morning routine.
Mhm. Beautiful. I love that you even go into body alignment because, that's something that no one really talks about, in my opinion, in terms of our alignment with our body and how that's stressing our body out. And something like you mentioned, we're all looking at our phones, we're all looking down nowadays, and we all tend to have that forward head position. Is that something that you've also, with your experience in radiology, that in particular you kind of have a keen eye for? Or is it just from your, experience with Primal Health?
I would say both. I
Mhm,
see I see that forward head posture on my screen in terms of advanced degeneration in the spine.
mhm,
And remember, I told you when I first started, I started seeing these changes in people's
mhm,
spines,
mhm,
and then I did the research. And my question was this: I said, why are people's spines aging faster?
mhm,
And I started dug deeper, and then as I dug deeper, and I found out that, oh, okay, it's this whole issue with forward head posture. And I was like, what is causing forward head posture? Well, one is looking down at your phone, which 99% of the people are doing. But also even at work, you're really not, people are looking down at their laptop, looking down at their screen, and rather than keeping a neutral spine where your ears all aligned with your shoulders.
mhm.
So you got to really restructure and redesign your day, and redesign the ergonomics of your space. So I see these changes, Miranda, on my screen in the spines. One of the interesting things we see is this. So in the back of our skull, where the muscles attach, this the occipital area. That's why the occipital bone is the back of our skull. Because people are looking down so much, and then the muscles there are kind of tugging on that area to keep your head up,
Mhm.
people are developing what we call is like this occipital spur. It's like this little horn people are forming. Okay, and if you're listening to this, just Google occipital spur, and you'll see that the modern man is the only man that has grown a little horn, or are growing these little horns in the back of their skull. I believe like many, many hundreds of years later, when they start looking at modern society, and they said, oh, okay, back in these years when internet was introduced and these modern cell phones were introduced, people's skulls started changing because they started growing this occipital horn. It's a scary thing, that to think that we're changing our skull by the way we're interacting with technology and in the modern world. So anyway, these are all the changes that I see.
Yeah. Oh, that's a little terrifying to me as you describe that. I'm just, oh my gosh, we're literally growing a horn from all of this technology use. And in a way, I mean, it's interesting then that it's almost turning us back into primates in a way, not obviously on, every level, but that it was a big accomplishment for humans to be upright. And now the fact that we're reversing that at this point is just a little bit sad and terrifying. With that too, I mean, we mentioned stress on the more global level as our body is perceiving it, but also to take it back to mental emotional stress, is that a big factor that people have to deal with as well in your experience? And how can people sort of tackle that a little bit?
So when I work with people in terms of a primal reset. Okay. And the master class I have, it's called a Primal Reset program. And I tell people that let's work on the basics first. Let's get your physical health right? Let's dial in your morning routine with the sort of the way we connect with the earth and the circadian rhythm and the body and the food and everything we just talked about. After I think people can get that aspect down, then you can move on to addressing sort of the emotional and mental aspects. And when we get to that space, I, you know, for example, I mean, people want to meditate, right? And I usually don't even use the word meditation because for most people it's like a turn off because like most people have been like I can't meditate, that's not for me, and so I don't even use the word meditation. But I tell people that before you even can meditate, you have to first correct all the kind of physical aspects that we just talked about, right? Getting your sleep right, getting your kind of morning routine right. But if you graduated out of that, then we can up the game a little bit. Okay. And when I talk about the mental space, okay, and most people think, oh, I got to get rid of stress. I gotta be, get rid of my stress. For most people, I think the main issue that I see from neuroscience, me being in neuroradiology, as I see brains aging and everything like that, there is no such thing as multitasking.
Mm.
We're just monotasking poorly. That's what it is. Okay. They say right now with all the social media and Slack and everything like that, people at work, they're task switching every 47 seconds. That's the average, industry average. And you think about that, our brain is designed for monotasking, right? And we're asking it to switch tasks every 47 seconds. That means you're checking your email, you're checking your text messages, you're checking your social media feed, and then you're checking your work text and your work platform every 47 seconds, which is ridiculous, right? So your primal design, we have this fabulous brain, which if you can give it a monotask and you can let it focus on one area, it starts developing proficiency in one area and it starts forming those connections. It starts myelinating those pathways and you start developing what we call is that space of deep work and mastery. It's a beautiful system. When done right, you can craft yourself into this phenomenal expert if you wanted to. You can become a master of anything, right? All this research on mastery, it says that, that's where the 10,000 hour rule, came out and all that. And all it said was that your brain is phenomenal if you can focus on few things. But right now, we just have poor monotaskers. We just have people switching tasks. So that's a big stress for people.
Mm.
And is that you're just doing too many things rather than splitting things up where you say, you know what, I'm going to give this one thing 20 minutes. Start with that. And I'm just going to do this one thing well for 20 minutes. Okay. And if you really want to up your game and you read work, there's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he talks about if you look at the science, when you actually give something 90 minutes of your time, your brain changes. Your brain actually relaxes, gets into that space, and you can do that one job so well, you will start developing mastery. Okay. So one of the things is that I talk about training people from that mental aspect, getting rid of this whole idea of multitasking. And the second aspect is from an emotional aspect, and I'm not just talking about relationships, okay? That's a whole different topic. But one aspect is the work you're doing aligned with who you are? I think it's a big thing for people, and most people don't talk about it as being a stressor. And what the fundamental premise here, Miranda, is that I believe all of us have a unique constitution. Some of us are thinkers, thought leaders. Maybe I fall in that category. Some of us are creatives, like my wife. Her artwork is behind me,
Mm.
and she's an artist. And she when she creates and when she does her art, she's in her space, and that gives her. It just opens up. It's a very relaxing thing because she's doing what she's created for, right? So some of us are creative, some of us are thinkers, some of us are connectors. We like to communicate with people. We like to be around people. And some of us are what I call our seekers, or we seek bigger meaning. We like to talk about bigger concepts. If we're doing work that aligns with our inner constitution, inner drive, it's very relaxing because we're doing what we're created for. Sadly, in this day and age, most of us, a lot of us do work just because it's work, but it's not aligned to who we are.
Mhm.
And so part of it is finding what is your that drive, what is your inner constitution, and doing things that are aligned with that. So when people kind of fix those two areas, it really reduces all those stressors in their life.
Oh, I love that. I completely agree with you with how important that is to be in alignment with what's truly our purpose in life, what really resonates with us, what really lights us up. And I love that you bring that up because you're right. I think most people just think we've got to get rid of all this stress, but I can't quit my job and I can't, it just feels very disempowering. So to be able to say, for one, just focus on one task at a time. Most of us can do a little bit better at that, at least, checking the email first, maybe giving ourselves an hour to do some work and then recheck it, something like that. But then also that reminder for people to just maybe think about what they actually love doing. And if they're not doing that, then maybe switching careers, that really could make such a big difference in someone's health and life overall, of course. I love it. I mean, you've given so many incredible insights here and tips. Anything else that you'd like to leave the listener? Final thoughts or tips?
Miranda, what I would say is that, again, will repeat this, is that the the closer we are to our primal design, the better we will age, and we will age more slowly, and our health will improve. And so it all boils down to primal alignment, how close we are to our primal design. And we talked about the physical aspects. We talked about a little bit about the mental aspects, emotional aspects. One of the last things I leave people with, and it's very few physicians talk about this, but I think it's worth mentioning, just for completeness sake of this conversation here. Um, the biggest fear we all have is fear of dying. Underneath all fears, if you look at anxiety, if you look at fear of heights, if you look at fear of public speaking, underneath all fears is this one fear of dying, right? And so this concept of mortality, I think that you can either run away from it, but you'll never be able to run away from it because it's just part of your biology, right? Everyone has an expiration date for sure. Whether you can extend it, let's say you live 120 years, you'll still have an expiration date. So either you can run away from it or you kind of come to terms with it. And I think when you embrace the fact that you are mortal, it raises a very interesting paradox. And what I would like to leave people with this is that most of us today live as if we have endless tomorrows.
Mm.
And because we think we have endless tomorrows, we spend our time in frivolous activities. We'll, doom scroll, we'll watch these Netflix late into the night because, hey, there's always tomorrow. If I waste today watching the whole series and everything like that, what's the big deal, right?
Mm.
So that's because you think you have this false understanding, this kind of like this false belief that there are endless tomorrows. But if you really put things into context and say, let's say, even if you live 120 years, I'm blessing you with like a tremendous lifespan. Okay, let's say that's longer than any man has lived. Okay, put it that way. But let's say you are the one and you're going to live 120. That's still a very short time. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, right? And when you come to terms with that, you realize that when you realize you have a finite life, you start making infinite decisions. Then you start chasing legacy, you start chasing larger vision, you start chasing more of an infinite mindset. You start asking yourself, what can I do today that counts, that's going to make a difference, right? So that's the paradox. Finite, when you understand you have a finite life, you make infinite decisions. But when you think you have an infinite life, you think you're going to live forever, you make very finite decisions. You just kind of you fitter away your time.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I think that helps a lot of people, and particularly I think for women's health, women struggling with this, is that if you come to terms with this and you have create this larger vision for your life, it's going to relax your body. When your body comes to the terms that, okay, we're mortal, but let me make today count, it's going to relax you. It's going to give you a level of health which will be incomparable to even everything we talked about in terms of emotional health, mental health, and physical health.
I appreciate you sharing that. That is such a great reminder that I think we all need. And honestly, something that I've truly actually been thinking about that more recently too, of how are we spending this one wild and precious life that we have? I can't remember who wrote that, but um, how are we using that time? I think that's such a great reminder. And I think it does allow us to actually be more present in each beautiful, tiny little moment and also just make so much more out of our lives. And truly too, physiologically, that does so positively impact our health too, when we just feel more connected to ourselves, more connected to our life, and we don't care nearly as much about the little stressors, like you said too. So I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, for sharing all these insights. We'll absolutely link your book and your reset program in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here.
Miranda, it's been a pleasure. One free resource I would leave your listeners is on my website. It's Kaveen Mistry, MD, KAVIN MISTRY, MD.com. If you go on, there's a free resource. People, always ask me questions like, how aligned do you think I am? Where do you think I stand with my primal alignment?
Hmm.
So I took all the questions I could think of, and I had the team create this primal alignment index. It will take a few minutes, like 2 or 3 minutes of your time, a couple of questions, but it will tell you where you stand in terms of your primal alignment with your physical health, mental health, emotional health, and even this last piece we talked about, your existential health. So it's 2 to 3 minutes of your time, but will give you a very good insight, and it will actually the results will tell you where you are deficient and what areas you can work on. Okay, and then you can fix those gaps on your own if you want to do it while reading my book, taking the course, whatever it takes, but it will help you fill those gaps for yourself.
Amazing. What a great resource. Thank you so much.